Accessibility. I will refer to accessibility in terms of optimization for search engines rather than optimization for users. Accessibility is probably the critical factor for crawling. Your crawl budget is dictated by how the server responds to bot traffic. If the technical architecture of your website makes it impossible for search engine bots to access URLs, then those URLs won't be indexed. URLs that are already indexed but are not accessible after a few unsuccessful attempts may be removed from search engine indices. Google crawls new websites at a low rate, then gradually increase up to the level it doesn't create accessibility issues for your users or for your server. So what prevents URLs and content from being accessible? DNS and connectivity issues. Use websites such as intodns.com to check for DNS issues. Everything that comes in red and yellow needs your attention. Using Google and Bing Webmaster accounts, fix all the issues related to DNS and connectivity. One DNS issue you may want to pay attention to is related to wildcard DNS records, which means the web server responds with a 200 OK code for any subdomain request, even for ones that do not exist. An even more severe problem related to DNS is unrecognizable host names, which means the DNS lookup fails when trying to resolve the domain name. One large retailer had another misconfiguration. Two of its country code top-level domains, the US domain and the UK domain, both resolved to the same IP. If you have multiple country codes top-level domains, host them on different IPs, ideally from within the country you target with the ccTLD, and check how the domain names resolve. Needless to say, if your web servers are down, no one, including search engine bots, no one will be able to access the website. You can keep an eye on the availability of your website using server monitoring tools like monitor.us, Scout, or Site 24/7. Host load. Host load represents the maximum number of simultaneous connections a web server can handle. Every page load request from Googlebot, Yahoo Slurp, or BingBot generates a connection with your web server. Since search engines use distributed crawling from multiple machines at the same time, you can theoretically reach the limits of the connections and your website will crash. This is especially true if you are hosting on a shared hosting plan. Use tools such as the one found at loadimpact.com to see how many connections your website can handle. Be careful though, your website can become unavailable or even crash during this test. If your website loads reasonably quick, let's say under 3 seconds, when used by a large number of visitors, you should be fine. Page load time. Page load time is not only a crawling factor, but also a ranking and usability factor. Amazon reportedly increased their revenue by 1% for every 100 milliseconds of load time improvement, and Shopzilla increased revenue by 7 to 12% by decreasing the page load time by 5 seconds. There are plenty of articles about page load speed optimization, and they can get pretty technical. Here are a few pointers to summarize how you can optimize load times. Defer loading of images until they are needed for display in the browser. Use CSS sprites. Use HTTP2 protocols. Use content delivery networks for media files and other files that don't update too often. Implement database and cache optimization. Enable HTTP compression and implement conditional GET. Optimize images. Use expires headers. Ensure fast and responsive design to decrease the time to first byte or TTFB. Use webpagetest.org to measure TTFB. There seems to be a clear correlation between lower rankings and increased TTFB. If your URLs load really slow, search engines may interpret this as a connectivity issue and they might give up crawling the troubled URLs. The time spent by Google on a page seems to directly influence the number of pages it crawls. The less time to download a page, the more pages are crawled. If you look at these two graphs, the correlation seems pretty obvious. Broken links. This is a no-brainer. When your internal links are broken, crawlers won't be able to find the correct pages. Run a full crawl on the entire website with the crawling tool of your choice and fix all broken URLs. Also, use the webmaster tools provided by search engines to find broken URLs. HTTP caching with last modified and e-tag headers. In reference to crawl optimization, the term cache refers to a stored page in a search engine index. Note that caching is a highly technical issue, and improper caching settings may make search engines crawl and index a website chaotically. When a search engine requests a resource on your website, it first makes a request to your web server to check the status of that resource. The web server will reply back with a header response. Based on the header response, search engines will decide to download that resource or to skip it. Many search engines check whether the resource they request has changed since the last time they crawled it. If it has, they will fetch it again. If not, they'll skip it. This mechanism is referred to as conditional get. Bing confirmed that it uses the if modified since header, and Google does that as well. Here is the header response for a newly discovered page that supports the if modified since header when a request is made to access it. When the bot requests the same URL next time, it will add a if modified since header request. If the document has not been modified, it will respond with a 304 status code. If it has been modified, the header response will be 200 OK, and the search engine will fetch the page again. The e-tag header works similarly but is more complex to handle. If your e-commerce platform uses personalization, or if the content on each page changes frequently, it may be more challenging to implement HTTP caching, but even dynamic pages can support if modified since.